Hello guys. Sorry if this is getting up a little bit late in the day. I tried uploading this before, but I realized my audio, my computer wasn't working very well. So I just got back from work, so now hopefully I can retry this and the audio is a lot better. So this is my module for main discussion post. So the first question I chose is, what is the relationship between words and systems as argued by the text? What do they do? What purposes do they serve? How do words and symbols relate to meaning? So many words share multiple meanings and relate to multiple topics. An example I have is involving the relationship between words and systems, and that is on page 218, section 5.2 of our book. So the quote is, languages are living exchange systems of meaning and are bound by context. This can relate to the semantic triangle as well, which is a three-part model in which a symbol refers to a thought, which in return refers to the thing it symbolizes. That is on page 218 as well. Context plays a very large role in this process, so I'll kind of combine my first quote and my semantic triangle quote here, and try and combine those ideas to kind of try and explain what I'm getting at. So a word's meaning is very different from a symbol's meaning. So you can explain things like, let's say you're speaking as an American about the United States. That doesn't mean you're super patriotic, but if you're going around dressed in like a bunch of like American flag, red, white, and blue things, then that's going to show that that's going to kind of symbolize that you're a little more patriotic, and that's kind of your intention. So symbols often just carry different meanings and social understandings, and the relationship between words and systems really depends on the contextual communication. I'll be moving on to my next question here, and it is the fourth question from the chapter 5 list. And it's discuss the most important ideas the text presents as barriers to communication. How have they affected myself? So the barriers I found within the chapter were cliche, jargon, hopefully I'm saying that right, slang, sexist and racist language, euphemisms, and doublespeak. So I'm going to be choosing jargon as my first example, and it is defined in the book as an occupation-specific language used by people in a given profession. That is on page 241. I have someone who I know who at times can be very difficult to communicate, as we all know someone like that. But my situation is, he had recently been certified as, I believe, a nurse. So he was in the medical field, and ever since I have conversations with him, and he tends, I think intentionally, to use a lot of clinical terms that are fairly complex when kind of unnecessary. And maybe in the hospital or around your coworkers, that's a good environment to do so. But around your friends, using those all the time and acting like it's just basic knowledge doesn't really get a good message across all the time. And so this kind of relates to the books example as well, where let's say you were presenting as a business person, you were presenting a product and it was fairly complex. So this product had there's some complex sciences behind it, and you're presenting to an audience of buyers. You don't want to necessarily get too in detailed with science and lose them, and use occupational based words that just kind of lose the attention of your audience because they don't know what's going on. You also don't want to be treating them like toddlers about it. You got to find this happy medium. So that kind of relates to my example as well, where he's got to kind of find that happy medium where he's not constantly using those around his close friend group who doesn't really understand most of the time. He's not treating us like we don't know anything, yet acting like the information's so obvious. But this can kind of relate to slang as well. If you were with your friend group and you have specific slang that you use within your friend group, like words or anything, you don't want to use that when you first meet a new person. That doesn't really come out. That doesn't really come off as a good trait. So that's kind of a similar scenario. Moving on to the next one here, we got This is moving on to the chapter 6 questions. The first one I chose was, in what ways does nonverbal communication add or detract from the communication process? Illustrate an example of how nonverbal communication has impacted interactions. So first we must understand what nonverbal communication is. Kind of have a story for this one at some point. This can be defined as the process of conveying a message without the use of words. This is on page 258, section 6.2. I think that nonverbal communication adds to communicating. So it adds to communicating because it's, quote from the book, in a conversation, nonverbal communication is continuous in the sense that it is always occurring, and because it is so fluid, it can be hard to determine where our nonverbal messages start and where others stop. So it adds because it's fluid. You can get more explicit points across. Let me explain this. So with verbal communication, you can be explicit. You can also kind of explain implied messages based off tone and other things. Whereas with nonverbal communication, it can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to be indirect and explain implied messages. And then you're always putting out messages, whether you realize it or not, through your posture, through your gestures. You're putting out messages about your mood or your state of being. So even if you're alone, you are. So that's kind of why it's always starting and it's fluid. And an example I have, so it can be more detracting because the messages are more direct. So expressing implied messages can be a lot more difficult. So my explanation about how getting an implied message across was kind of my why it can be detaching. But my story here, I have a situation where it's affected me, nonverbal communication. Where I work, we have an alarm system for when we close. So if you don't get your keys in the door and the alarm set correctly, then the loudest alarm in the world, where it sounds like people all the way across the world can hear it, starts going off. Well, that happened the other night, and I remember that my coworker was across the restaurant, and he doesn't have a code, and so I'm trying to tell him mine. He can't hear me. There's no chance. This alarm is way too loud. So I'm using my nonverbal communication to make him kind of connect the dots, telling him, over here, put in the code, and I'm giving him numbers like 3, 6, and so he can get through it. That's kind of my story there, where I guess in the moment when everything's going crazy, I was a little bit proud of that, but now that I think about it, I mean, what else was I really going to do? Anyways, moving on to my last question. Using the text as your primary source, how are there ways you can enhance your own intercultural communication? First one I chose, there are 4, is the illustrators, which is nonverbal expressions that reinforce a verbal message. This is on page 261. I think this would be enhancing to my communication because, any expressions, any gestures I can use to enhance a message to make it less confusing, whether it's at a restaurant where I'm serving someone food and I'm trying to show them that I'm either happy to help them or busy at the moment. So any way to enhance that, even outside of there, just with my family or friends. The next one I chose was the regulator, which is a nonverbal message to maintain or discourage interaction, such as holding your hand up to pause. So with some of these, you do have to be careful because they can be interpreted differently in different places. Like I think the book said Native Australians, their hand up and shake their head to say no. And so kind of holding your hand up, pausing is an example of kind of a regulator to stop the conversation in the moment in that context. The third one I chose was affect displays, and this can enhance emotional representation non-verbally, so facial expressions or gestures. And then the last one I chose was masking, which is substituting more appropriate displays for less appropriate displays. This is on page 265. So this is pretty much anything I can do to replace one way I communicate and make it better. But that concludes my module 4 discussion. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them down below and reply. Thank you.